common confusion I see about the philosophy of Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari is, what do they mean by schizophrenia? I mean, their famous collection of Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus is subtitled Capitalism and Schizophrenia, and I remember seeing that as the subtitle for Anti-Oedipus well before I was even ready to get into reading them. And I was like, what does that subtitle even mean? I mean, what are they trying to convey with that? And some who are either learning about Deleuze and Guattari or maybe really dislike them are really confused about, are they actually asking us to become schizophrenic? To give you the short answer, no. I'm not going to be that guy who's going to hold you out until the end of the video. No. It's much more of an analogy than you might think, but there is actually some literal credence to it. So Deleuze and Guattari are really doing a radical reform of psychoanalysis, particularly Freudian psychoanalysis, but they also have their qualms with Lacan. Now, what they see in Freud is he's trying to imagine the relationship between the unconscious and the conscious mind. And of course, the conscious mind is going to be one which we feel that we're in control over. Everything is very overt, whereas the unconscious is mysterious and hidden. Oftentimes it's hiding repression, which, if it were to be delivered too suddenly, would leave us psychologically distraught and damaged. But for Freud, he sees the unconscious as basically being hierarchically structured by the parents at the top, and particularly the father at the very top. This is the exigence of the Oedipus complex. And in the Oedipus complex, the parent is the first love of the child, and in particularly, the mother is the first love of the male child. The male child comes out of the womb, has this instant attachment to the mother. So they develop this connection over time, and you have to remember that for Freud, libidinal energy is in children as well. So this sexual energy, for lack of a better word, is in children, and this is what makes everybody love. So Freud says, okay, the mother is the first love. You make this really strong connection. I mean, think about the kind of connection you have with your mother. It's very different from other loving connections. Of course, none of us would call it romantic. Even less, I hope, would call it sexual. But Freud says, okay, at some point in life, it becomes clear that the incest taboo has entered the scene. That the child is not actually allowed to consummate or fulfill this desired sexual relationship with his mother. And it's notable that this is basically only talked about in the context of the male child. There's a lot of patriarchal kind of undertones in the Oedipus complex and in Freud in general. But what happens is that moment reaches where the incest taboo comes on the scene, and the child is blocked off from fulfilling this fundamental desire. As a result, the male child starts to foster a sense of hatred for his father, indeed a desire to kill his father, as the Oedipus myth goes, and to marry and have sex with his mother. And this is one of the formulating things for how Freud comes to think about the unconscious. And what's going to happen here is all of this layer of repression and confusion. It's going to be like, for example, if a colonizer, say a British colonizer, comes over to America, to the US, and says, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to let the natives decide what the name of this land is going to be, or in fact what race they are. I'm going to say, okay, you are Indians. I'm going to call this America. which comes from Amerigo Vespucci, an Italian. So you've got all of this stuff of imposing order onto something external that you come and invade. And from there, you're going to, okay, let's kill the natives, let's take the stuff that they have that we need, let's destroy the landscape, and let's turn this into our little utopia. Now what's going to come from this? Well, you're going to have the natives forced to do some things they might not otherwise want to do. For example, because we've introduced this scarcity by taking their resources and taking advantage of them, we've created conditions, systemic conditions, that make the native need to come into war more frequently with neighboring tribes. So all of a sudden, because of the colonizer coming on the scene, imposing form over top of what already exists, we have a number of maladies which come up, which in this context would be, the stereotypes of the war-prone native. Now for Freud, in this kind of analogy, this would be the equivalent of neuroses. These are maladies which result because there's something unordered about the unconscious. And it's like, well, of course there's something unordered. You've come in and claimed to impose some order, some rationality onto here. When in actuality, the whole reason the neuroses exist is because we've decided to create this ordered pattern, this ordered matrix that we lay over top of what is actually there. So in the context of the unconscious, all of these neuroses that are going to result from the Oedipus complex are not because the Oedipus complex has failed to be resolved, but because it's been imposed in the first place. Because every time you come to a psychoanalytic session, you're inevitably going to be stamped with, oh, it's your mother or your father. It's always about the parents. All the dreams come back to the parents, everything. And Deleuze and Guattari see this as imposing, hierarchical. They see this as failing to provide the liberatory capacities that are actually already immanent to the unconscious. And if you want to understand some of these, consider watching my lecture on desiring production. Because for Freud and Lacan, some desires are going to be fulfilling what is naturally suited to one. And this is going to accord with the Oedipus complex. So for example, if I continually say, no, I don't want to have sex with my mom, Freud would say, well, actually, what you're doing right now is you're denying your desires. The current desire you claim to have, which is to not have sex with your mother, is in fact a deficient one, which is failing to recognize this repression and resolve it. And of course, as you can imagine, this is going to create a lifelong situation of needing to resolve something which has been imposed in the first place. And I mean, most people are not going to be having sex with their moms just to resolve this imposed complex. So Deleuze and Guattari say, no. And they're kind of going off of Lacan too here, because Lacan kind of accentuates this notion of desire as lack. And he says, okay, if we look at the way that the subject works in the world, it is constantly desiring something. And presumably it's desiring something because it does not have it. It needs to be fulfilled. Think about the root there of filling up. So Lacan says, okay, it's always going outside of itself into the world to try to absorb something to fill itself up, which presumably would mean that before that it is empty in that particular regard, with reference to that particular desire. But every time this desire is fulfilled, all of a sudden it kind of recedes away and is no longer important, and now you have a new desire, and you constantly are needing to fulfill yourself and never actually reaching a state of being fulfilled. And Lacan says, okay, the reason that this happens is because you can never actually fill up your subjectivity because the subject is fundamentally empty. It is fundamentally lacking, and this aspect or action of desiring is a testament to the fact that the subject is lacking what it desires. Now, Deleuze and Guattari are totally going against this, where they say that no, actually desire is something productive, testifying to these creative capacities within the subject. But regardless, Deleuze and Guattari are trying to go against this notion that certain desires can be seen as inherently a priori lacking and others not. Now, notice that I put in there a priori, because it's certainly the case that in a particular situation, some desires are going to be advantageous and some are not. Say, for example, you have a female boss and you're in a very high up position in a corporation, and you have the desire to just have sex with your boss. Well, in most situations, this is probably not going to be advantageous to you because you have a workplace situation that you need to kind of keep on the professional level. Say you also have been getting hints that she's not into you. Yeah, all of this stuff is adding together to say that in this moment, to desire this thing would not be advantageous to you. This would probably lead to a situation of feelings of personal lack. So Deleuze and Guattari are not, getting rid of this notion of lack, but they want to go against the sort of a priori lack that you are going to deduce from the Oedipus complex or from these other structuralist understandings of the unconscious. And that is fundamentally what Deleuze and Guattari are going against when they introduce the idea of schizophrenia, is they are going against a structuralist understanding of the unconscious. As it's said in the opening paragraph of Anti-Oedipus, what a mistake to have ever said the id being the unconscious. So their problem is reducing the unconscious to the unconscious, to an a priori way that it is, and then our actions and our desires are either confirming or repressing this static version of the id. For Deleuze and Guattari, the id is not something pre-made. We might say its existence precedes its essence in this case. That in fact it is always responding to its environment, taking in stimuli. I mean, this is a very kind of Humean empiricist or even a pragmatist understanding of the unconscious. So it's constantly taking in information, and okay, depending on how your parents raised you and depending on whether or not you were abused or something like that, yeah, this is going to figure into your relationship to your parents. But it's not just a priori that you desire to kill your father or to hate your father in a less extreme manner and to love in an extreme way to the point of sexual intercourse with your mother. No, this is not pre-made. So they want to come up with a conception of the unconscious that is going to respect this need to take in information, and instead of imposing form upon the unconscious and the world outside the unconscious, instead to be privy to the form that comes to one through the world. And for them, this is the schizophrenic. So think about what a schizophrenic is going to do, and you'll get this in the first few pages of Anti-Oedipus. You might want to check out my Anti-Oedipus primer series. That in the third episode, I go through the opening few paragraphs of Anti-Oedipus and really break this down. But with the schizophrenic, they are always habitually associating themselves in the world. There is constantly a freeway between these two in which, I don't know, someone comes in the room and all of a sudden they pick up a pen in a weird way, and now they're a secret FBI agent undercover who's out to get you. Now, is this a delusion? Yes. But does it represent this intimate contact with the world, this perceptiveness? If you've ever met a schizophrenic person, oftentimes they will be very perceptive to minute changes in the environment. Now, of course, schizophrenic people are not a monolith, but hopefully you'll understand what I'm saying. That with the schizophrenic, Deleuze and Guattari see a state of mind of approaching ontology, the unconscious, reality, which is going to be non-hierarchical, which is going to be anarchic in certain respects and dangerous in certain respects. And this is why they say that approaching the schizophrenic state is not for everyone. But what it does mean is this radical honesty between what I am as myself and what the world has made myself into. It's this constant interplay between the two. And it might be worth bearing in mind that the schizophrenic and the rhizome are basically the same thing in their essence. They're both kind of showcasing a similar approach to reality that is going to just listen. Because that's what they say, especially in A Thousand Plateaus, in the early chapters on Freud. This is the big criticism that they have of psychoanalysis, is the psychoanalyst isn't actually listening to their patients, because at the bottom, when you come to your psychoanalyst, you are ready for them to deliver you that stamp of it's the parent, it's the mother or the father, it's some repression, and this neurosis is linked to this repression, which I am going to help you solve. And this leads to a situation where the patient doesn't actually get heard. And this is one of the things that really carries into a kind of a clinical understanding of how to be a psychoanalyst, is that in fact you're not really doing the analyzing, but you're just a medium for them to kind of analyze themselves. No, it's not that simple. But the point is to listen, just as the schizophrenic is going to be listening to the world. That is what they find beneficial about the schizophrenic. Now, they do not literally want us to become schizophrenics, and they actually mention this several times, that this would be to follow not a line of flight, which would be this creative avenue that has yet to be blocked off. This would instead be to follow the abstract line of death. This is the a priori commitment to, I want to be revolutionary and liberatory, and assume that this just has one path, which is just a straight shot to schizophrenia. No, they say that's going to lead to the actual condition of schizophrenia, and it's going to lead to potentially your death, or to your psychological death. What they want us to do is step by step open up and broaden our conscious and therefore our conception of our unconscious mind. So that being said, I hope that this has helped clear some things up with regards to what Deleuze and Guattari are trying to do. You can check out any of my other lectures that I've done on postmodernism, German idealism, gender theory, post-colonial studies, and other classic literature. You can become a channel member for $5 a month and gain access to, among other things, a private philosophy Zoom, which you can tailor to your needs. I also have super thanks available if you'd like to donate to the channel, because books are not cheap, and I'd really appreciate anything you have to give, but no pressure. That's it for this lecture, and I'll see you in another one.